Camera on, and she will introduce our speaker. Thank you. Yeah, the checks would be written out to the Rotary Foundation and sent to our office if anybody's not sure of that. Our speaker today, Ted Pitts, Carrie will introduce.
It's my honor to introduce Ted Pitts today. As the president of the IRMO Chamber, we work definitely as an extension of the state chamber, so it is my pleasure. Ted Pitts took over as president and CEO of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce in January of 2015. Ted came to the chamber after serving as chief of staff for the South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, working for the governor during her first term in office from 2011 to 2014. Prior to that, Ted served in the South Carolina House of Representatives from 2003 to 2010, representing Lexington County. Ted comes from the business community where he was a successful commercial real estate agent or broker and partner with the South Carolina firm Wilson Kibler. Ted also serves as major in the South Carolina Army National Guard and is a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan. Pitts is a graduate of Presbyterian College where he currently serves on the board of trustees. He and his wife, Christina, live way out there in God's country with me out in Lexington. So it is my honor to introduce Mr. Ted Pitts.
Thank you, and I see a lot of friends out in the audience, so it's always an honor to get to come address you. Hal Stevenson, who helped the chamber get its Small Business Council up and running, chaired that committee for a long time, served on our board and on our executive committee at the Hal. Thank you for your involvement. I see Ted Creech also, who serves on our Legislative Affairs Task Force. I don't know if I see anybody else who's currently on one of our committees, but thank you. South Carolina is doing really well right now. So actually, Bernie, I about left you out. Bernie serves on every committee and every organization that deals with the General Assembly, it seems like. So. It's a great opportunity to address you. Things are going well in South Carolina. When you look at some of the metrics that businesses look at, unemployment's low. We're now below the national average at 4.4%. South Carolina is has the least unionized workforce in the country at about 2.1%. We continue to grow. Can anybody tell me when South Carolina broke the $4 million population number? Does anybody remember when that was? When South Carolina's population crested above 4 million folks. It was 2000. And this year they're projecting that we'll go over 5 million residents. So when you look at South Carolina, a lot of that growth, most of that growth is from people moving into the state. There's not a lot of births aren't driving that number, it's people moving here. And they're moving here in a lot of ways, first to retire and take advantage of the quality of life we have here in the state, but a lot of them are coming here for jobs. So when you drive around the state and talk to CEOs and you say what keeps you up at night, almost all of them, whether you're the McDonald's franchisee in North Augusta, South Carolina, or whether you're Pete Selleck, the North American head of Michelin, it's workforce. We have a situation where our workforce, really across the country, but here in South Carolina, is aging, and almost half of it's over 50 years old. So that means in the next 10 or 15 years, about half of the workforce is going to retire. So we've got to replace those jobs. But then it also has something to do with the economic development that's going on around the state. When you look at the success that Governor Haley and Secretary Hitt had, and the jobs that have come to the state, really all over the state, you see a lot of that. As I drive around the state and talk with CEOs, I've spent a lot of time up in York County. When people think about growth in South Carolina, they think about Greenville and they think about Charleston, but really the growth that's occurring in York County in some ways tops that growth that's occurring in those regions. In Charleston, I think they have something like 51 new people move to Charleston a day and claim it as their primary residence. So that's a lot of growth, and there's really only one way to grow down there. Growth creates some burdens on certain things. But when you go to York County, there are a lot of manufacturers, national manufacturers and others, some of them are line jumpers that are jumping from North Carolina down into South Carolina. But some of them are just moving to the state for the quality of life the affordable workforce. And, you know, kind of when we look at workforce and wages, you know, these people that are coming to South Carolina, in a lot of cases, are coming for the workforce and they're coming for the cheaper wage. But in almost all cases, they pay more than the average South Carolina wage. So when that development occurs and those jobs come to South Carolina, it really does have a large impact on the community. So one thing that was done last year on the state level was the Department of Employment Workforce led the charge with the Department of Commerce. They did what they called a sector strategies study or analysis. And they took the state, they broke it into 4 regions. They said, all right, I want the people, the workforce folks and businesses in that area, let's drill down and see what sort of jobs are coming in the next decade or further out. And let's try to tool our training and our education establishments to meet those jobs. So when they broke it down, you know, across the region, they came up with things that we would expect for them to come up. Healthcare. So healthcare job growth is actually the top that's anticipated. You've got diversified manufacturing, transportation, distribution, and logistics, and construction, and then business and IT services. So when you look at those things, you know, something that the Chamber is doing is we're trying to get our policymakers to focus on getting our institutions to train people to do those types of jobs. You know, we talk about the aging workforce and the need to replace those, but we also have to talk about these new jobs that will occur, and the growth in those sectors is above and beyond the retirement of an existing workforce. It's additional need for jobs. So as we look at South Carolina and we look holistically around the state, a lot of the reasons that Katerina at Volvo will say they came to South Carolina is because of the workforce, but also when they come to South Carolina because of the workforce, we have to provide that workforce that they need. And you know, we have members, I have some members that say, hey, I love when a Volvo comes to South Carolina, but you know, I've got a manufacturing facility in Berkeley County too. I wonder how many of my employees are going to go take the higher wage at Volvo and leave me in a situation where I'm looking for a workforce. So when we look at it, workforce is the #1 issue that they talk about. You know, something that's getting a lot of press now is the other issue that they talk about, and that's South Carolina's infrastructure. So when we look at where we've come from in South Carolina, where in 1987 they raised the gas tax, to where we are today with the cost of construction, with inflation, you know, with the amount of traffic that's on the road, with CAFE standards going up, so consumption's going down. When we look where we are in South Carolina, you know, we're behind many other states, and it's really become a concern for industry as they look to expand in South Carolina or to come in South Carolina. So the business community for about a decade now has called on policymakers to provide more funding, sustainable recurring funding for infrastructure. And I guess we're hopeful that this year's the year that they're going to do it. So the House has took up the bill. Speaker Lucas deserves a lot of credit. The Majority Leader Gary Simrell led the charge for him on that. But they passed the bill earlier this year with 97 votes in the House. And that's important because, you know, the governor has said he's going to veto it. So we need to make sure that there's a supermajority in place if we're going to see it become law. So the House passes the bill with 97 votes, and it's now in the Senate, and it's come out of committee, and we're hopeful that this is the week that they're actually going to vote on the bill, and we are told that it's going to be. But it'll be close. The numbers will be close. We have said, the business community has said, is it's time to finish the job on roads, and you know, we're going to need to do it in a fashion that gets 2/3 in the Senate. So there's a lot of compromise and agreement that's occurring there that still has to occur. So when you look at the state of our infrastructure and you look at where we compare, and we use metrics in our businesses to compare where we were last year or in the past or against our competitors, when you look at metrics on where South Carolina compares, we spend about 1/10 per lane mile that they spend in North Carolina. So when you look at the overall condition of the infrastructure, you would expect our roads to be worse than North Carolina's. We spend about 1/6 what they spend in Georgia. And you can do that. People always use the example of riding up I-95 and you come out of Savannah where it's 8 lanes and you hit the bridge and then you go down to 4 lanes and start hitting potholes. So we have a situation in the state that really needs to be addressed. You know, I'm a conservative. When I served in the House, I'm a Republican. Believe that, you know, you have to watch every penny you spend. But the reality is we've kind of flipped that. And the more conservative thing to do now, in my opinion, is to fix them. Because if you look at what happened on I-85 last year in the upstate, they had a resurfacing project that was led on at I-85. And they ended up taking up the top layer, that milling up the asphalt. And when they got down below the top few layers of asphalt, they realized, wait a minute, the base on this road is bad, and we have a reconstruction project, not a resurfacing project. So the business community, who would love to pay less in taxes and not more, has said, we're at a situation where the state's largest asset, our infrastructure, is literally crumbling beneath our tires. And we need the General Assembly, our policymakers, they're the only people that can fix it, to fix it. So when you look at where we are today, we're really at a place where the General Assembly has to do this. And the business community has called on it to do that. We're working with leadership, Shane Massey in the Senate and Senator Setzler. We're working with them to try to help them get to a place where they can find a compromise. And ultimately, we believe that compromise can occur. And the Senate hopefully will pass a bill this week. That bill then has to go back to the House, and if you look at where the House is, they'll probably not agree with the Senate changes, so it'll end up in a conference committee, and then we're hopeful that they'll get it done before they leave this year. One thing that they did last year, which the business community thought was a good thing, is they shortened the legislative session for by about 3 weeks. So instead of adjourning at the beginning or the end of the first week of June, they're actually adjourning 3 weeks sooner, and hopefully we'll have all their work done. You watch the General Assembly work, and I'm not pointing fingers. I'm a recovering member of the General Assembly, but it's the first 2 or 3 months. What are we doing? What are you doing? And then it gets to the end, and you rush. It's kind of like I treated college with my term papers. I could have had the whole semester to write it, but it's like the last week before it's due is actually the week that I do the work. So we're hopeful that this year is the year that they're going to do it. The business community has put the full court press on and said we need for you to do it. We're gonna praise those guys and gals that do the thing that needs to be done, and we'll criticize and other things to folks that don't understand why it's the thing we need to do. But ultimately, you hear Pete Selleck at Michelin say, it will affect our plans for the future if South Carolina can't get this right. The thing that we do have really going right for us from an infrastructure perspective is the port of Charleston. So when you look at where we are in the port, the General Assembly did something good. They set aside the state share for the post 45-foot project, the dredging project down in Charleston, that will allow the post-Panamax ships with the deepening of the Panama Canal, will allow them to call on Charleston. The Port of Charleston continues to be an economic driver for the state, and really is a lot of the economic development that's going on is attributable to that. So BMW, for example, they have in the U.S., they're the largest single exporter of vehicles. About 70% of the X-Series vehicles that are made in Greer are for export, and they ship out. They ship out of the Port of Charleston. Michelin, from this area, a lot of us get behind the super tires that Michelin makes in Lexington, the earth mover tires, and you get behind them, and 3 or 4 of them sticking out of the top of a Connex, headed on their way to Charleston. Each one of those tires costs about $80,000 or $90,000. So you get behind those going to Charleston. But Charleston continues to give us that advantage. That, coupled with our strong right to work laws from a manufacturing perspective, will continue to give us an advantage. South Carolina is the top exporter of tires. We have Conti, we have Bridgestone, we have Michelin. GT is broken ground, or is going to open in Chester. So when you continue to look on that front, we do a lot of things. But the chamber and the business community, we're starting to look at, we have to make sure we diversify our economic base. And we need to look at other things like IT services that we can broaden and bring a different type of job to South Carolina. Manufacturing's been very good to the state. We do a really good job in South Carolina making things. World renowned for that. Our logistics work from our transportation port, for example, works. The airport in Charlotte is a benefit or a draw for us. So we continue to have a lot of things going. And as I travel around the country some and talk with my counterparts that are leading chambers in other states, they'd give a lot for our problems. The problems we have here, in a lot of cases, are results of our successes. So when you look at that, it's good. Something that our members have been focused more on recently is on the federal level and the issues with the federal government that are important. You know, the Ex-Im Bank, which is very important to a lot of industry here in South Carolina. You know, you hear about GE and Boeing and being important to them, but it really is important to some of our smaller producers around the state. So the president has appointed a leader of the Ex-Im Bank. He's also made some appointments. And, you know, ultimately, we're hopeful the Ex-Im Bank will get up and operational again, because it is key to what we do here in South Carolina with manufacturing. Trade agreements. So the border tax. I hear a lot of internal conversation with our investors about the border tax, the border adjusted tax, or trade agreements. You know, on the border adjusted tax, we have the people that export, the international companies that export out of South Carolina, they don't want a border adjusted tax. The homegrown or the US based companies, they don't care. They wouldn't mind one being in place. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And then trade agreements. You know, it's funny, I had somebody call me when Michelin announced they were building a plant down in Mexico. I had somebody call my office, you know, irate, how could Michelin move all these South Carolina jobs down to Mexico? And I just said, hey, don't you understand this is a new facility? They're not closing a facility here and going there. And they're like, yeah, but you know, Michelin's a South Carolina company. They don't need to be building a plant in Mexico. And I said, how old are you? Because, you know, I know Michelin's been here for a while, but as far as I remember, they're a French company, aren't they? He's like, oh, they're from France. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, okay. But, you know, the reason a lot of BMW, Michelin, others, a reason that they have facilities in Mexico is because Mexico has better trade agreements than we have. So they have trade agreements with more countries. When 98% of consumers don't live in the United States, trade agreements are important to our manufacturers. So we have a lot of those folks asking questions about what's going on in D.C. The EPA, the Department of Labor, the NLRB, I think there's a hope that we'll have a more business-friendly climate inside of those federal agencies who, for the last 8 years, were not very business-friendly from the amount of regulations that they implemented that cost businesses money. And in some cases, they didn't see the true impact that they had. So on that front, the federal level is still something that businesses in South Carolina are still keenly watching and interested in seeing what happens. You know, and they're also hopeful that they don't shut government down at the end of this week. We had SCDC Day, where we flew into DC and met with the delegation from South Carolina, and almost all of them assured everybody that, you know, they weren't going to shut government down again. So we're hopeful that that's the case. Well, that's kind of an overview of where we are and what we have to work on. We've got a short 3 weeks left, 9 legislative days left in the General Assembly over here, and we're hopeful that they can move the roads bill. We continue to work on other issues like business licensing, which is important to our small business group and the businesses in South Carolina. We work on those issues too. But with that, I'm happy to take a few questions. I know you keep the clock down here for a reason, so that means we have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Yes, sir.
We've heard in the past something about an inland port. I don't know if the chamber has anything to do with this. An inland port up toward Charlotte that would be fed by rail. So to try to get some trucks off of I-26. Is something happening?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we have an inland port in Greer. So there is one inland port in Greer that actually BMW and others use, which takes a lot of truck traffic off the road. And then they've just broken ground on the next inland port in Dillon. And Harbor Freight is there, and it will be the primary customer. But so that would be the 2 inland ports that we've had. You know, there really hasn't. You know, inland ports, I think, work best when you have the manufacturer right there close to it, as opposed to trucking it in from somewhere else and then putting it on rail. But both those inland ports have been key to Charleston and getting some truck traffic off the road, also cutting some costs. And, you know, if you look at the rail yard there at North Charleston, you know, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, very successful in getting a dual rail yard, which allows both Norfolk Southern and CXS to use. So that sort of competition helps keep costs down. And so those inland ports have been key to kind of port growth, which had its best quarter, I think, last quarter in kind of the growth that's occurring there. So good point. Yes, sir.
For the last couple of days, we've been reading the series of articles about mega farms and the impact on the state. Would you please comment?
Yeah, so, the environmental community has, I guess, turned their focus on farming. And, I would tell you that farming, and it talks about these corporate farms, but farming is a part of South Carolina's heritage. And it needs to be done in a responsible way. But, those farms are complying with all the laws on the books. They're not breaking any laws. So from a chamber perspective, we think we need to support the agricultural community. And I'll tell you that when you look at rural South Carolina, Volvo and others aren't going to rural South Carolina in a lot of cases. So in a lot of ways, these